to the Sedgwick podcast, where we spend time discussing topics related to our Forecasting 2025 thought leadership platform. I am Kimberly George, Global Chief Brand Officer, and with me today is Max Koonce, Sedgwick's Chief Claims Officer. Max, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Kimberly. Yes, as Kimberly said, my name is Max Koonce. I'm the Chief Claims Officer for Sedgwick. And one of the things that I get to do that I find very intriguing would not really describe it to the fullest extent, but I get to evaluate a lot of the things that are going on in the industry. And I think that's going to be one of the topics that we're really focused on today is what is going on in the industry with regard to this topic. But it allows you to really look at the data, analyze the law, look at what we're seeing as far as outcomes. And my hope is that the information that we're able to provide as a result of those things that we analyze and evaluate, that we're actually helping the industry in general look at things that are really important, especially in the workers' compensation arena.
The two of us recently had the opportunity to host Sedgwick's In the Know webinar where you and your team shared the 2024 year-end State of the Line reports. It was a really great summary of trends across our business, including short-term disability, leave of absences, and job accommodations, along with property and casualty. And one of the trends that really stood out is the prevalence of mental health in claims. And that's the topic of today. To help us level set, mental health and well being is a topic that's been growing across society and within claims over the past 15 plus years. Companies and communities have been working to break down mental health stigma. Employers encourage use of health benefits to support mental health treatment. Group health benefit managers have added a variety of in person, telemental health, and digital health apps to promote mental health and well being treatment. And even here at Sedgwick, for a number of years, we've had behavioral health specialists to help our adjusters and workers on the return to health and return to work. So, with that, we're going to be discussing a commentary paper Max and team recently released. And Max, will you share a little bit about that report and why you chose to publish it?
Sure. First and foremost, we, as you know, Kimberly, obviously, because you and I work for the same company, is that, but for our audience, Sedgwick does a lot of work within the what we call workforce absence arena. And basically, we're talking about non occupational injuries here. And what we had seen over the last several years, especially since COVID, was that mental health concerns were becoming a greater and greater area within the accommodations and the disability arena on the non occupational side. And we all know, especially during COVID and over the last several years, we've seen mental health take a prominent face in workers' compensation state legislation from the standpoint of first responders. So that prompted us to say, okay, what's happening on the occupational injury side? What is happening in the workers' compensation arena? So we went in and we dug into the data. And that was probably the thing that surprised me the most is that when you looked at mental health claims, there stood out certain aspects of it that clearly showed that the course of treatment could influence significantly the outcomes that you saw within these claims. And so that's really what prompted us to publish the paper. Number one, the concerns of society in general with regard to mental health. And then number two, what our data showed us as to the process that could be accomplished within the workers' compensation arena that could have a significant impact. And we felt like that was important to publish to the industry as a whole.
I think the industry's really hungry for how mental health professionals and mental health, whether it's anxiety, PTSD, or general mental health and well being, impacts on workers' compensation. There's very little research out there. So I was thrilled when you shared with me you saw some trends and felt comfortable enough with sharing them. So kudos to you. The commentary paper's called Unveiling the Hidden Struggles, mental health and workers' compensation. There's a link to that in the show notes as well. It's available via Sedgwick.com. So let's talk just as helping to level set mental health and workers' compensation. Many in the industry start to shake, say, "What are you talking about? Mental health's not covered in my state. Mental health might, from a claim perspective, only be available to first responders." Why don't you help us understand how mental health claims vary by state and maybe why?
Okay. So the first thing is we know every state has their own legislature that is responsible for setting the workers' compensation laws in that individual state. And as you can imagine, some states are more progressive, some states are more liberal, some states are more conservative with regard to how they approach that. Basic premise is the same across all 50 states, but what they cover or what they include with regard to workers' compensation can vary significantly. With regard to mental health, you basically have two categories. You have what they call mental claims, which are claims that are allowed in the workers' compensation process that do not involve a physical injury. And then you have physical mental claims. And those are mental health claims that arise out of a physical injury that is covered under workers' compensation. When you look at all 50 states, virtually all of them, to some degree or another, allow claims for mental health if there is a physical injury associated with that individual claim. The mental claims are only allowed in a handful of states, one of those being California, New York, and as you can see on down the road, that is somewhat the more progressive or liberal states as we might associate with them that do allow that expansion of workers' compensation. What a lot of states also allow, and it's more than just the ones that have mental claims, is they allow mental health claims for first responders. Point being is that these are individuals that are working for the public in general.
Mhm.
They're providing a service to us in a time of high anxiety, high need, high danger, whatever you want to categorize it to, but they're exposed to extreme conditions from the standpoint of work. And it makes sense that they should have that association for the mental health aspect of a claim in their individual states. Some states have even gone so far as to allow presumptions. What I would also point out is when you get even into the physical mental aspect of the claims, states have different burdens of proof. They have different things that they will allow. And so
Mhm.
what you have is a hodgepodge. You have some states on one end of the spectrum, other states on the other end of the spectrum, and everything that you can imagine in between. And there's not a lot of consistency in there as far as how they approach. But the one caveat I would give is that it is a very prevalent topic with a lot of state legislatures. So
Mhm.
they're looking at it, they're evaluating it, they're trying to determine if they need to change their law in their particular state. So you have a lot of variety, but you still have that physical mental aspect that's pretty well covered by everyone.
Thank you for that. I think it's really helpful to understand, and as a nurse, I know many healthcare workers believe that, the workplace violence, the stress, the burnout, that mental health claims should be a part of healthcare systems as well. And I know some states have discussed that, and as you said, I think the prevalence of states that allow mental health claims will grow in time simply because there's such a push for holistic care. So it's good
Agreed.
to level set that. What is the prevalence of mental health claims in workers' compensation? Do we see it as outright mental health claims, or are mental health situations a companion to the claim and impacting it? What do you see in the data?
Well, our data, that's where it got very interesting to me. And I'm kind of a data geek when it comes to that. I like to dig into it, kind of figure out the pieces of the puzzle and see what picture it paints. But really, it's a very, very small percentage of the overall claim volume. And when you look at it, it's a little less than 2%. And it's been at that level for the last 5 or so years when we looked
Mm,
at the data. There is a difference. There's a higher prevalence of the mental claims than there is when it's a physical mental claim. And what we did was we broke our data down into two aspects. We called it primary and secondary. Primary being where mental health was the number one claim that was filed. So that what we call mental. And then secondary, where it was associated with another injury, and that would be the physical mental. And so when you looked at it, the physical mental being an aspect of the physical injury claim was less than 1%, whereas the higher level came on the mental aspect of the claim, which we called primary. Now, what was interesting is when we talked about the difference in the laws in the individual states, is you saw differences in the volume of claims for those states. So the states that you had that have allowed a mental health claim as the primary claim, then they had a higher level of mental health claims in those
Mhm.
states, either primary or secondary, than in states that did not allow those. And when you looked at that, California and New York were the two states that stood out as far as allowing for that. When you looked at some of the other states, like Texas or Florida, they had a much lower number as far as the overall volume of those claims. And then when you got to other states where they only had the physical mental aspect, you had even a less than 1% volume associated with those. By industry, not a lot of difference. It really boiled down to the state where the individual was, is
Mhm.
that was filing the claim, as to whether or not that state law allowed the mental claims. And those were the states that you saw the higher number. But even then, you're talking about 5%. Still a very, very low percentage of the overall claim volume.
And then when we do have either mental or physical claims where mental health plays a role, what is the treatment that we're seeing for injured workers, or how are we supporting them?
Well, before I get to that, Kimberly, what I would point out is that when you look at these claims, just like with other comorbidities, and so let's treat mental health as a comorbidity, such as
Hmm.
diabetes, high blood pressure, different things like that, is you saw the cost escalate because you're treating something additional to that physical injury. And it makes sense on the mental health side, is because when you have that involved in the process, you recognize that can impede the return to work, it can lengthen the time of disability, can put you on a different medical care plan. And there's several aspects of it that really engage in the process that can impact that longevity of the individual claim. So what you see is they tend to last longer, three and a
Okay.
half times more than those claims that don't have it and have that attending medical treatment and attending challenges with return to work. What we did see, and this is probably the most intriguing aspect of the data, was the impact of a behavioral health specialist or behavioral health treatment in the timing of that as to how it could impact the overall claim. And so we broke our data down and looked at the timing of that treatment. And when it was in the first 3 months or first 90 days of the claim, you saw a significant impact from the standpoint of how it compared to those claims that did not get treatment until after 6 months or longer. And we're talking cutting down the overall aspect of the claim as far as duration by 60 or 70%
Wow.
and everything that's attended to that. And that was the most startling aspect to me when I saw the data, was just how crucial that was and the timing of it. And the sooner
Hmm.
you got it, the bigger the impact it had on that overall claim and the individual associated with the injury and how fast they could recover, get back to work, and get on with their lives.
Really interesting. And we've had behavioral health specialists for quite a long period of time and really slow uptick on helping the adjusters, even the nurses, with return to health and work. for those injured workers. And I just want to say kudos to the employers that are really beginning to see that mental health claims are within the top three, most likely number two behind pregnancy for disability claims. So,
Correct.
regardless of men, women, age, we really do see this prevalence across the workforce of mental health challenges. And so, the sooner we can get in front of these, especially around anxiety, fear in the workplace, fear with return to work, the better I think will be long term. I know that a podcast goes fast, Max, and you had a ton of information in the report. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
Well, I guess what I would say in closing, Kimberly, is the holistic approach in workers' compensation, where you're looking at the social aspect of it, is becoming even more critical in today's environment than I believe it was in the past. And when you take that type of approach, you really have, as this paper pointed out and the data supported, you really have a chance to have a very positive impact on that injured worker and helping them return to their pre injury situation as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's the really great feedback. And for those of you that think that if we do support through a behavioral health specialist the mental health aspects of the claim, that a mental health claim will be created, Max, what would be your short answer regarding that?
Just because you provide treatment, and you'll have to look at the individual state law, but overall, I would say just because you provide treatment doesn't mean that you're accepting a claim for that condition. I
Yeah.
mean, it still has to be related to the employment, still has to rise out of and in the course of, and all those types of things. But when you're looking at this situation, what you're trying to do is really get the best outcome for the injured worker. And your state laws can vary. But in totality, when you look at that, how can you achieve those best outcomes? What we see is it makes a difference.
Thank you for that added information. And Max and I both want you to know that we do believe use of a behavioral health specialist is case by case. We are not fully assigning a behavioral health specialist to every case where there might be anxiety with an injured worker, but it is a great tool. We'll continue to keep you updated on trends as Max and his team are closely monitoring mental health and workers' compensation claims. So, Max, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you sharing your insights regarding mental health impact on workers' compensation claims and also offering the commentary paper to our clients, our colleagues, and our industry partners.
Glad to do it.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in to today's podcast. Stay tuned for my next podcast with Adam Fisher, Sedgwick's Chief Data Science Officer. Thanks again for joining us today.